Chernobylite is a game with a lot of things to love. Eerie atmosphere, incredible art direction, and importantly for Digital Foundry, a whole suite of ray tracing effects. But the game has been out for a while now, and it's a more or less known quantity, minus this new ray tracing added in a patch. So in today's video on Digital Foundry, I will look specifically into the ray tracing in Chernobylite. I will check out how it enhances the visuals on PC, and what RT settings you can use that I would consider optimized. Furthermore, I will take a look at the PlayStation 5 to discuss what trade-offs are made to bring ray tracing to console. And lastly, I will have a brief discussion here on user experience in general in Unreal Engine games, as that hashtag stutter struggle has reached a peak. But first, let's talk about the positives. Chernobylite is a really well-rounded visual package. The developer Farm51 has a real knack for the art of this area of the world. The geographic flourishes, the signage, the shapes, and even more are all captured incredibly well in this game. If you have ever seen photos of Pripyat or the reactor at Chernobyl, then you'll find this game represents them very faithfully. A reason for this faithful adaptation into a game is as a result of the game using textures sourced from the actual exclusion zone in Ukraine. This gives the game a photorealistic appearance, where most surfaces examined up close have great materials and high resolution details. Adding to this is just a generally competent usage of Unreal Engine graphical features that we've seen before, and some neat tricks like rapid camera transitions where the world changes in a heartbeat. Chernobylite can be flashy, but it can also be moody and down-tempo. And if you ever wanted to visit this region of the world, but you can't for obvious reasons, then this is a game perfect for you and that virtual tourism experience. The developers knew this, and they even have a virtual tourism option here on the PC version where you can just walk around the game's various levels without the stress of all the survival horror elements in the main gameplay loop. Backing up all this atmosphere are the new ray tracing features that I mentioned. With Chernobylite using Unreal Engine 4 and ray tracing plugins there, they have access to a variety of non-standard ray tracing effects that can dramatically impact the realism of certain materials and conditions in the game. And thanks to a developer post on the web, we know exactly which ray tracing effects are in play at which settings. For one, you have ray traced reflections. When RT is pumped up, these RT reflections do a lot more than you can find in many games that have RT reflections. For one, they apply to surfaces even that are incredibly rough, and even at the lowest PC setting. This is important for this game, as the area around the city is very matte and grungy, and does not have many pristine surfaces, as years of decay have set in. For example, look at this old rusty metal cylinder with ray tracing on versus off. Even though this is an incredibly rough surface, the RT reflections are being applied here. They're capturing that specular lighting hitting that worn metal. Another not oft seen aspect of the ray traced reflections in this game are the incredible far distance to which they apply. Objects that are kilometers away are added into the BVH structure, so there's never a moment in this game where you can see objects in the world that are not found in reflections. Similarly impressive is how the reflections have a very high quality representations of the world in them. Textures and objects found in reflections match the quality of the objects themselves, so the reflections look really pristine. And lastly, we have the fact that all vegetation is captured in these ray traced reflections, so every branch, twig, bush, tree, and leaf can be viewed in a reflection should you so look. This is significant, as much of the decayed city and suburbs are overrun with vegetation growth. This is not a clean modern city, and it is key that reflections can represent that. As you can imagine, all of these impressive and uncompromising reflection properties don't come cheap though, but I'll get to that later. The next interesting RT effect is the usage of ray traced translucency, and this does many things. For one, it adds realistic refraction to transparent objects like this bottle here. Without RT translucency, it looks rather gamey, and with it, you can see the realistically distorted world behind the bottle. Ray traced translucency also adds ray traced reflections on transparent surfaces, like here where you can see the ray traced reflection in the windscreen of this car that is sorely missing without ray tracing. And lastly, there's just generally better shading of transparencies with ray tracing, like you can see here where the shadows from the trees above are visible in the foggy glass on this old truck that are once again keenly missing without ray tracing. The third ray traced effect is ray traced caustics. There is caustic light from water found throughout the game world that moves with the water's surface, So like here, you can see wavy lines of light that align with the water surface above in this pool of murky water here. We've seen that before in other Unreal Engine games though. The newer and more curious effect found in Chernobylite is caustic light from transparent meshes. It can be more obvious, like you can see here, from the colored shadows emanating from the stained glass window as it is being hit by sunlight, where we can see the colors of the very stained glass bits on the ground here. It can also be much more subtle, like the added bounce of light and that slight chromatic dispersion and tinge to the lighting added underneath this lamp here in this scene. The reason why we're seeing caustic light here as the light from the bulb is being transmitted through the glass casing surrounding it. This is interesting to see, I think, as usually such an effect like this is faked with IES profiles and projection textures, but we're seeing it done here in real time and adds a new layer of light into scenes. For example, here without RT caustics, the light looks rather standard like you've seen in so many games, but with the light transmission through the glass casing, with RT caustics, we can see that there's much more light scattered around the scene, and there are new shadows from that light as well. It's rather neat. The last ray tracing effect is the most subtle in my opinion, and that is the inclusion of DDGI. DDGI is a form of probe-based diffuse global illumination that uses ray tracing to prevent usual issues that probe GI can have. If you want to learn more about probe GI, I recommend checking out my tech focus on global illumination that I've linked in the video description. In practice, this DDGI does not always dramatically change the game's lighting since the game already uses static bake lighting as far as I can tell. So for example, we can see DDGI will brighten up this area here with green bounce lighting from the plants, as the static passive lighting missed these dynamic objects. Or here in this hallway, we can see DDGI adds in light coming from the windows that the static pass for some reason also missed. But in many other scenes, the difference from DDGI being added in can be more subtle. With that, we have all the ray tracing effects that Chernobylite has added, and I hope that my descriptions of these effects has shown you that the baseline quality here is high. And since the game has a lot of vegetation, that means ray tracing is going to be expensive. How expensive? Here the game kindly provides a really great benchmark that flies through the game's various levels, and using this it's easy to determine that just turning on ray tracing itself to low, which only includes ray trace reflections, costs roughly 34% of the performance on an RTX 3090 at 4K DLSS in performance mode. It's a hefty sum, but as I mentioned earlier, even the lowest setting leaves ray traced reflection quality very high, and there's a lot of objects included in the ray tracing structure. And there's all that vegetation too. When going from low to medium, every other ray tracing effect is turned on, with ray tracing reflection staying the same quality as low. High and ultra refine the quality of every ray tracing effect, excluding DDGI. So medium, high, and ultra are quite expensive. Going to medium, adding all the effects types, is 13% slower than low. High with its refined ray tracing quality is 7% slower than medium, and ultra is a further 20% slower than high. Those are some significant performance numbers there. So which setting here would I consider optimized? As I see it, medium should be the go-to choice for GPUs that are competent at ray tracing, as it offers most effects with reasonable concessions to quality. For example, in this scene here, going from low to medium gives us DDGI, as you can see quite obviously, and DDGI quality is the exact same from medium to ultra, so we definitely want at least medium for this effect. What about for translucency? Well, as you can see in this scene here, we get a majority of the benefits of translucency on this bottle when going to medium, and only smaller refinements at high and ultra. Same with this reflection on the car windscreen here. Most of the quality is already there at medium. So what areas are helped most by the higher settings? Well, for one, the roughness cutoff of ray traced reflections is rather greatly increased when going up to ultra, as you can see here in the inside of this train car, where the rougher surfaces get reflections on high and ultra not found on medium. The same applies to a degree with translucency reflections, as you can see in the window here. Rougher glass there shows a reflection not shown at medium. Another refinement is in caustic stability. Water caustics look mostly the same between medium and ultra, as you can see here, but caustics from light glass, for example, are much more temporally stable at high and ultra. They can be a bit wobbly at medium at times. But my point still stands. Medium gets you all the effects, and high and ultra seem more for future hardware or 30 FPS targets. In the end, my optimized settings proposal is as follows. If you have a GPU which is 2070 Super-like in ray tracing performance, then you should be targeting medium. That is good enough for a 1080p internal resolution, and an RTX 3080 tier GPU would be what you would need for an internal resolution of 1440p or so. But of course, I would recommend using DLSS if you can. An RTX 2060 Super is well challenged by this game's high-quality ray tracing implementation, as even when set to low at 1080p here, you can see that the 2060 Super is hugging that 60 FPS line, and it will go and dip below that 60 FPS line at multiple points through the benchmark. This is good for VRR territory, but not for a locked 60. Medium is in comparison mostly in the middle to lower 50s in this benchmark, with a number of locations that can dip into the 40s even. So I would think DLSS would be required to hit a more consistent 60 FPS at medium, so you can see why I'm saying DLSS is a priority here. Going to cross-vendor comparisons in the high range, I was able to measure a 20% faster performance on the RTX 3080 than on the RX 6800 XT through the benchmark when set to medium ray tracing at 1440p. The 3080 maintains a frame rate above 60 FPS throughout the whole first bench, while the RX 6800 XT spends a good portion of the benchmark below 60 and often in the 50s. So given how heavy this game is obviously on PC with ray tracing, how is it looking and running on PlayStation 5 with ray tracing? First of all, the PlayStation 5 limits the usage of ray tracing to quality mode as far as I can see. The performance mode without ray tracing targets 60 FPS with a 1080p resolution. Quality mode with ray tracing goes for the rather high 1512p output resolution in my counts, and it managed to count 1512p every time I counted. There could be dynamic res, but I have yet to find it. A nice point about both modes, and quality mode in particular, is that they don't miss a beat from the performance target. Quality mode with ray tracing is always 30 FPS and only has a hiccup when the game is saving, which induce frame time spikes on all platforms in my experience. So how exactly is this game maintaining a consistent 30 FPS performance at this higher resolution with ray tracing? For example, an RTX 2060 Super at that resolution really can't manage medium settings at 30 FPS, given that enables all effects types. So what exactly is PS5 doing with its ray tracing? The answer is simple. It is making cuts. DDGI, as you can see in this comparison here, DDGI is indeed missing on PlayStation 5. Translucency refraction? Yeah, it's not there. Translucency reflection? No. Caustics of any type? A definite no. There are ray traced reflections in here on PlayStation 5, which would make you think that we're looking at quality mode here, but as soon as you compare to quality mode at 1512p resolution, one can see that there are other further optimizations on PlayStation 5 below the low RT mode. Resolution, for example, is quite lower than what we see on PC. Secondly, the roughness cutoff is much higher on PS5 than found on PC, so a floor like this one lacks the ray traced reflections that you can see on PC as it is a rougher surface. The distance of objects included into the BVH is cut down as well, which you can see here with the power plant across the river missing on PlayStation 5. And lastly, there is a culling of smaller objects in the reflections at times. This is quite obvious on the rooftop here, where a simple side-by-side shows missing objects in the reflections on PlayStation 5. These seem like deep cuts in comparison to PC Low, but remember, PC Low in this game already has very high quality RT reflections. And the setting of this game makes the RT reflections more expensive than it could possibly be in other titles due to the amount of foliage in there and how expensive it is to ray trace against such things. With that comparison out of the way, we need to briefly touch on user experience and Unreal Engine. In spite of being a brilliantly made game with cool ray tracing effects, Chernobylite suffers from stuttering on PC. As you might imagine, the big core of these stutters is from shader compilation happening just in time instead of being covered asynchronously or in a pre-compilation step. So the first time you run through an area like you can see on the left here in the benchmark, you will see large frame time stutters that do not occur the second time you see that exact same content. This dramatically impacts the smoothness of the game and has a very negative effect on the user experience, as it really transports me out of the immersion immediately as soon as the game is begun. The opening of the game is filled with very large stutters. stemming from this issue, some of which are very, very long. For example, the game's first scare totally misses its emotional mark, as it is punctuated by a huge 1.5 second long stutter the first time I saw it. Unreal Engine titles have been suffering from this for quite a while now, and I'm very saddened to see it happening here, as this is otherwise a great game. On top of that stutter, I did find other stutters as well that are less explainable. For example, that same jump scare induces a 500 millisecond stutter the second or third time I watched it on PC. So it seems like there's issues of loading and deloading objects in this game. I did not find this behavior at all on PlayStation 5. Chernobylite is a beautiful game with an interesting yet heavy RT implementation. PS5 has great frame rate stability in its RT mode with high resolution, but there are some significant quality cuts when you put it next to PC. But that's really all I can say for now. If you did like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as DF posts a video. If you want to help us out, support DF on Patreon to get years worth of Digital Foundry content in high quality for download. Otherwise, write a comment below and follow on Twitter. And as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.